into London's East End. To our left-hand side, we have the areas of Wapping and Whitechapel. Now just back on the left, folks, there's a dock entrance. Now that's the entrance into the St Catherine's dock. And years ago, that was a high security dock. Valuable cargo, like tea, ivory, wool, gold, silver, was taken into the dock on our left-hand side. Today, luxury yachts and sailing barges moor inside the St Catherine's dock. And it's a very nice place to take a walk. It's a bit of a hidden gem here in London. Not a lot of people seem to know about it. And just around the dock, there are bars, shops and restaurants. A very nice place to take a walk, St Catherine's Docks. To our right-hand side, folks, we have the area of South East London, Rotherhithe and Bermondsey. If you look to the right, coming into view, there's a little creek, a muddy little entrance. And it was up here on Jacob's Island that Charles Dickens set the scene for his famous novel, Oliver Twist. Oh. It was up here that Fagin had his den of pickpocket thieves. Fagin dropped his box of jewels in the mud at the end of the film. This is where it all took place here on the right. They actually filmed part of the film, Oliver, here on the right, because back in those days, the area retained a lot of the character from Charles Dickens' time. Many of the streets were narrow and imposing, and many of the streets in this area on our right are still paved with cobble. Now Charles Dickens would have known this area very well because his father was imprisoned here in a debtor's prison, and that a young Charles Dickens would have walked these streets looking for work, trying to pay off his father's debt. Now the area to our right, Bermondsey, folks, as I said, quite a few famous people have been born in Bermondsey. David Hay, the former heavyweight champion of the world, Max Bygraves, Tommy Steele, a couple of old English entertainers. But perhaps the most famous person to come out of Bermondsey was a young boy called Maurice Micklewhite, who grew up, became an actor, and changed his name to Michael Caine. Sir Michael Caine, the famous Cockney actor, was born here on the right in Bermondsey, in fact not too far from where we are now. As we head down to Greenwich today, folks, we're going to see lots of riverside homes, and a lot of these buildings were once warehouses which stored goods and cargoes like teas and coffees and spices and rices, etc. Most of these are warehouses and now riverside homes. And just to the left we see Oliver's Wharf, which was one of the very first warehouses to be converted into luxury riverside apartments. We've had some very famous people living in Oliver's Wharf, including Robert De Niro, David Bowie and Cher, the singer-actress. Cher owned a penthouse suite in Oliver's Wharf, and she actually wrote a letter of complaint to our company, complaining that we kept pointing out where she lived. Apparently, she had stalkers outside her door 24 hours a day. So she wrote a letter to our company asking us to stop pointing out where she lived. And it's okay, she doesn't actually live there anymore. She has now moved further downriver, and I shall point it out when we pass it. Next up on the left, we have the headquarters for the River Thames Police. This is their base at Wapping, and the Thames Police are one of the oldest, if not the oldest, organised police force anywhere in the world. They were formed before the first official land police in this country, the Bow Street Runners. And they were set up to put an end to the piracy, the thieving that was rife out here on the Thames many years ago. Now, all cargo that used to arrive into London would arrive via the river. It was the main highway. 30% of this cargo was being stolen on a yearly basis. So the Thames Police was set up by ship owners and the Admiralty to try and put an end to the thieving ways. Years ago, the areas of Wapping on our left and Rotherhithe on our right were very poor areas, and people would have been out thieving just to survive. Folks, there's a church spire just back on the right, and that's St Mary's Church at Rotherhithe. Now, buried in the grounds of that church is Captain Christopher Jones, the captain of the famous pilgrim ship, the Mayflower, which was actually crewed with people from the area on the right. And just look back on the right, there's the Mayflower pub, the little black and white building. You can see the British and American flags flying at the front. Now look to the roof, you'll see it a lot clearer as it sits against the white backdrop there, but there's a fine detailed replica of the ship, the Mayflower, acting as a weather vane. And once the Mayflower ship left this point, it went round to the south coast of England. It stopped at various ports along the way, picking up its passengers, who would later become known as the Pilgrim Fathers, before setting sail to find the New World. To our left-hand side, lots and lots of riverside apartments. New buildings that stand alongside the old converted warehouses. The old warehouses always have the names on the front of the buildings. And here we see New Crane Wharf, a little further along Metropolitan Wharf. Now the word wharf is quite an odd word. It's an Anglo-Saxon word. It's over 1,000 years old, and it means quay or dockside. Look up the definition in a dictionary. It's a raised berth or a platform where a ship or a barge unloads. If you follow the buildings along on the left, eventually you come to a small white building next to a willow tree. This is the oldest, the most famous pub to stand on the banks of the River Thames. It's called the Prospect of Whitby, and it dates back to the year 1520. Originally, the pub was called the Pelican. In its long lifetime, it's had many different names. The pub sits in the area of Wapping, which is just on the outskirts of the City of London. And during the reign of King Henry VIII, Wapping was a dangerous, a squalid place to live. Life expectancy wasn't very high. During this time, the pub became known as the Devil's Tavern, when it was frequented by many an unsavoury character. You'd find thieves, pirates, smugglers, murderers, all drinking in the establishment at and around this time. And to be honest with you folks, it hasn't really changed too much today. In there today you'll find bankers, estate agents, politicians, those kinds of people. It changed its name to the Prospect of Whitby sometime during the 1700s, and this was due to a coal carrying ship called the Prospect. It would travel from Whitby in Yorkshire, bringing its cargo of coal to this point on the river, the Prospect of Whitby. Look beyond the workings and the treetops here on the left in the distance. You can just see a grey building with a blue roof, and that's the famous Royal London Hospital, which is situated in Whitechapel. Just ahead of us on the right, the building with the red crane on the front is Globe Wharf, and this is yet another converted warehouse. Now, you'll notice, folks, that the old warehouses always sit right on the river's edge. It's a requirement by law today that new buildings have a footpath between the river's edge and the building itself. And this isn't the case with the old warehouses. They always sit right on the river front, and this was so years ago, barges could be placed alongside the building and then be unloaded. Globe Wharf, an old rice warehouse, and the cheapest apartment in there today sells for around £500,000. But that will be on the other side of the building, looking out onto the road. Anything this side with a river view will be a lot more money. Just ahead of us on the left-hand side now, we have a dock entrance. It's the entrance into the Limehouse Marina. And once you've passed through those lock gates, ahead of you, there are 2,000 miles of inland waterways and canals. If you look to the left of the lock entrance, there's a small red brick building. Now this is a pub. It's called the Narrow at Limehouse, and it's owned by the famous foul-mouthed chef, Gordon Ramsay. He owns the pub on the left, the Narrow at Limehouse. Occasionally, when we pass by here and the wind's blowing in the right direction, you can actually hear him over there, effing and jeffing. He's a very angry man for some reason. I don't know why. He's got lots and lots of money. You think he'd be very happy, but no, very angry. Next up on the left, another famous pub that stands on the banks of the Thames. Now folks, don't get the wrong idea about us, okay, but we have to visit all these pubs purely for research purposes, of course. This one's called The Grapes, just before the first white building. It's written The Grapes at the top in gold letters, and the pub was immortalised by Charles Dickens when he mentioned it in his book, Our Mutual Friend. The Grapes pub has been bought by an English actor, Sir Ian McKellen. He's bought the Grapes pub, and he actually lives in one of the narrow houses to the right of it, just next door to Cher. Cher doesn't really live there, but Sir Ian McKellen really does. He has bought the Grapes pub. He's often seen drinking in the pub. Looking ahead of the boat, folks, we have the Canary Wharf development, which includes the Canada Tower. That's the tallest building with the pyramid top. The Canary Wharf development, folks, is now more or less the financial centre for the City of London. It's also home to many of our tabloid newspapers. It gets very busy over here, Monday to Friday, during the week, when it's buzzing with up to 100,000 office workers. It becomes a little bit quieter on the weekends, but there are still people over here because there's lots of bars, lots of restaurants, and there's an underground shopping complex beneath those tall towers. The area of land that Canary Wharf sits on is called the Isle of Dogs, and it's a piece of land that's shaped like a horseshoe. Walking straight across here for about 20 minutes brings you out on the other side of the river, facing the O2 Arena. And if you look to the left, in the gap between the buildings there, you can see the yellow support arms that sit on top of the O2 Arena. The land on the left here, folks, it runs all the way down the bottom. At the bottom, it bends round to the left in a very large bend. The land then runs all the way back up again, parallel to this side, creating a large horseshoe-shaped piece of land. Greenwich sits at the foot of the horseshoe. And it gives you a bit of an idea, folks, to how the River Thames twists and turns. Because we travel relatively slowly, it always seems like we're going in a straight line. But we do go around quite a few bends, and we've just passed round the bend, back on the way. On doing so, we enter into a stretch of river where there's not really too much of interest either side of us. As you can now see, it's mostly riverside apartments, or unaffordable housing, as it's otherwise known. It's a very popular place to live nowadays on the banks of the River Thames. Years ago, this wasn't the case, because the river wasn't as clean as it is today. It was very polluted years ago. There was lots of sewage floating in it, and it stunk. Nobody wanted to live or work anywhere near the Thames. But the PLA, that's the Port of London Authority, have done such a fantastic job of cleaning the river up that it's now a very popular place to live, as well as a very expensive place to live. So folks, at this point, seeing as there's not really too much either side of us to talk about, you've got a couple of options here. Now, I can either stop talking, leave you in peace and quiet until we get down to Greenwich, okay? But if you're interested, I am more than happy to continue talking and explain a little bit about the River Thames itself. Would you like that? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, no problem. At the moment, ladies and gents, we are heading down river, okay? The open sea is about 30 miles ahead of us. We are travelling down river with the outgoing tide. The tide is ebbing out to sea, which it does for 7 hours. It reaches a low water mark, at which point the tide turns and floods into London for 5 hours, until reaching a high water mark, at which point the tide turns, ebbs out to sea all over again. In 5 hours today, ladies and gents, the tide here will rise around 6 metres in 5 hours. Now at the moment, we are experiencing neap tides, okay? With neap tides, the water doesn't rise very high, doesn't drop very low, it doesn't flow very fast. We then experience spring tides, okay? It changes week to week. With spring tides, the water will rise very high, will drop very low, and it flows a lot quicker, okay? And occasionally, on a very good spring tide, in 5 hours, the water can rise 8 metres, which is a lot of water that comes rushing into London, especially when you consider the open sea is 30 miles away. This is why we have the Thames flood barrier a little further downriver at Woolwich, constructed back in the early 80s, and since its construction, it's saved London from flooding on numerous occasions. In its entire length, the River Thames is 220 miles long. This is from its source in the Cotswold Hills up in Gloucestershire where it starts as a small stream. It then runs all the way downriver to the estuary, which is where the river meets the sea. 220 miles in total. Only 95 miles of the Thames is tidal, and this is from the estuary all the way inland to a place called Teddington. It's at Teddington that you come to the first lock, and that is the end of the tidal Thames. Above Teddington Lock, the river is non-tidal. So at 220 miles long, the Thames, it's not a particularly large river. It's mostly famous for the area through which it flows. As I just mentioned, a very clean river today, with over 100 different species of fish. Lots of different fish-eating birds, and we often see seals here in the Thames. There's a colony of seals down by the Thames estuary. Every now and again, one of these seals will venture upriver. It hangs around for a few days, popping up here and there, before returning back out to sea. A few days ago, there was a seal beneath London Bridge. About 10 years ago now, maybe a little bit longer, some of you may remember this, a 14-foot whale swam as far up the river as Putney, which is some way inland. Now, as the tide started to ebb away, the whale, obviously very distressed and disorientated, it tried to beach itself up at Putney. A massive rescue operation went into plan, and they somehow managed to lift the whale out of the water. They placed it onto a barge. They then tried to drive the barge down to the sea to release the whale. They got about 3 or 4 miles from the sea when, unfortunately, the whale died. So a bit of a sad story, folks, but every effort was made to try and get the whale back out to sea. Unfortunately, it just wasn't enough. But all these things, folks, go to show how much cleaner the River Thames is today. I will agree, it doesn't really look it. This is because it's a mud-based river. The fast-flowing current constantly churns the mud at the bottom, which gives it this murky effect. It never really gets a chance to settle. However, if you was to take a glass of river water, leave it to stand for about 20 minutes, all the mud would sink to the bottom, and the water at the top would be crystal clear. The people that monitor the quality of the water here in the Thames, they say you can drink it. They say you can drink River Thames water. You'd probably die. You could drink it if you wanted to. I wouldn't try it. I wouldn't recommend it, folks. As we pass round the bend, there's Greenwich ahead of us, folks. We'll be down alongside the pier very shortly. A lovely shot of the Greenwich area ahead of us. If you are leaving us at Greenwich today, which we highly recommend, it's a beautiful place to visit. It's an old naval town, so very big on English naval history. Looking ahead of us down there, folks, you can see a large white building with 2 grey domes on top. And this is the Royal Naval College. For many years, it's where the Navy trained and nursed their personnel. Situated right behind the Naval College is the National Maritime Museum, which is one of the finest maritime museums anywhere in the world. Now, Greenwich Observatory is also down here, and it's up at the observatory that the meridian line lies, the line that separates the east and the west hemispheres. You can walk up to the observatory, and you can stand across this line with 1 foot in the east, 1 foot in the west, at exactly the same time, making it possible to be in 2 places at once. The observatory is situated in Greenwich Park, which is one of the nicest parks anywhere in London. Okay, it's about a 10-minute walk from the pier, and we can just about see the observatory. You'll see it a lot clearer as we come past the flats here. The sailing ship ahead of us on the right, the Cutty Sark, a famous old tea clipper, open to the public. A lot of people think the red brick glass dome is the observatory, but that is in fact the entrance to a foot tunnel, which crosses the river at that point. You enter into there, you walk beneath the river, and you exit through an identical dome, just hidden behind the trees there. That brings you out into Island Gardens, a little park on the left side of the river. There's the observatory, just behind the ship now, in the distance, in amongst the trees, the green dome you can see is Greenwich Observatory. It's about a 10-minute walk from the pier. Lots of places to grab a bite to eat down here, folks. Lots of pubs, lots of restaurants. Okay, so we highly recommend going ashore, having a look around Greenwich. The boats return every 40 minutes until 5:50 this evening. 10 to 6 is the last boat back to Tower Pier and Westminster Pier, so you've got plenty of time to go ashore, have a good look around. Okay? Every 40 minutes until 5:50 this evening. As you can see, we're starting to turn the boat. We are going to get you into Greenwich Pier. If you could, folks, remain in your seats until we are safely moored alongside the pier. When you leave us, folks, just make sure that you take everything with you. You'd be amazed how many people leave their kids on board the boat. Okay? And that is not a joke. I was actually left here when I was 7 years old. I'm still here. I haven't had a day off yet, okay? So take a look around, gather your belongings. Don't spoil your day by leaving anything behind. I hope you've enjoyed the journey down to Greenwich with us today, folks. I hope something we told you along the way added to the journey. I did mention earlier, we're not guides or commentators that provide a few words. We're merely crew members. We don't get trained to do this in any way whatsoever, and it's not easy standing here making stuff up, hoping nobody notices. But we try our best, and hopefully it adds to the journey. If you'd like to show a token of appreciation for our effort today, folks, you can do on leaving the boat. You'll see me by the exit in the traditional manner with the captain's pot. Whatever the outcome, folks, I would like to thank you for travelling with us today. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you for listening. And whatever you're doing, have an enjoyable remainder to your day. Thank you.